the entire industry, whether we're talking about suppliers from China, whether we're talking about suppliers from the US, from Western Europe, wherever it might be, Korea for that matter, they're all here, right? And so that's basically why this event is such a great industry event, just pulling everybody together into that same walking distance of each other, and everybody collecting together for these meetings. So I wouldn't say there's anyone with a particular upper hand. I mean, yes, I mentioned earlier that the Chinese vendors are definitely here in force, but it is a case where, you know, everybody's got a presence here. And like I said, it's basically just as it was pre-pandemic. Now, I do think, however, maybe to your question, you know, obviously there are risks for a number of vendors in the industry. The ecosystem, the whole political environment has changed quite a bit over the past few years, particularly with the tensions with the US and China. So as I talk to a lot of, or rather some of the conversations that come up in the industry, when you look at how some of these Chinese phone vendors roll out, one of the common questions is, well, what are the risks that they might get disrupted like Huawei did a good number of years ago, right? You talked about Honor earlier. Honor, of course, is the mobile phone spinoff of Huawei, and they're basically trying to rebuild their business that they used to have as Huawei, but now they've had to rebuild a lot of that from scratch outside of China. 90% of their phone volumes are still in China today, but now they are trying to build that overseas effort. And so I think that's why they're also here, you know, trying to make such a loud statement as well, too, because now that finally the pandemic is over, everybody's back on the ground. We can engage, they can engage with their customers here and really rebuild those relationships.
Bryan, it's Hadley out in Abu Dhabi. Just before we let you go, your enthusiasm at this point is infectious, I've got to say. But IDC is saying it's still quite cautious on the tech sector. Just run us through, if you will, what are some of the key headline risks?
Yeah, sure. So the smartphone market last year contracted 11%. As we go into this year, we're looking at a relatively flat market, a slight contraction of -1. That's actually down a little bit from where we were 3 months ago. Now, there are obviously a lot of macroeconomic pressures, inflationary pressures. You look at smartphones, for instance, obviously consumers are under pressure, particularly in developing markets where, you know, they may be more worried about food costs rather than buying that next smartphone, right? Now, the good thing about the industry is the premium part of the market above $600 for a smartphone actually has been more resilient. That part of the market only contracted 2% last year, as opposed to, again, the total market contracting 11%. So there's there's certainly still quite a bit of activity going on in the industry. But yes, of course, there are those risks. Obviously, one of the things that we're watching for is 2023. Is there a recovery in the second half of the year? Do some of these recessionary fears go away? And also, eyes on China. You look at that domestic market there, now that it has finally opened back up again, we're starting to see retail footfall increasing. We're starting to see a little more interest in devices and that sort of thing. Question mark about whether or not how strong that recovery is going to be in the second half of the year. As you mentioned, we took a little bit more of a conservative route just to stay cautious. But the upside scenario here is that there is a more pronounced recovery, and hopefully, for the sake of the industry, we'll see more upside on that.